The Chinese produce goods that the world wants to buy, and they say that you need to pay yuan for these goods, not dollars.
The economic Cold War. Why the US and China seek to decouple their economies. Tensions between the United States and China have been rising, with discussions of decoupling the two countries' economies. While some, like Christine Lagarde, the president of the European Central Bank, warn against decoupling, others argue it may already be underway. According to Bloomberg, US-China trade hit a record $690 billion in 2022, but there are signs that both countries have significantly reduced their imports from each other. Chinese goods made up just 16.6% of imports in 2022, down from 21.6% in 2017, while the share of American exports going to China also fell. Both China and the United States have their reasons for the decoupling, with China looking to avoid isolation from the US economy, and US leaders looking to prevent China from accessing their most advanced technology in case of conflict. However, decoupling will have economic ramifications for the rest of the world. Even the industry is against it, with many expressing that they do not want it to happen. But is decoupling even achievable? Some experts say no. While Western leaders attempt to unravel decades of globalization, many Asian nations view China as central to their economic future. Even countries that have moved production to other nations still purchase components from China, making real decoupling much more difficult than it appears. Bilahari Kausikan writes that even the closest US ally is unlikely to cut itself off from China politically or economically. Many Western countries are unwilling to forego the benefits of selling and buying from China, and China currently has no alternative to the West for access to important markets and critical technologies. The US and China will continue to compete robustly, but for now, they must accept the risks and vulnerabilities of remaining connected to each other. Decoupling talk may also overlook the impact on other countries. The United States and China play very different economic roles in East Asia, with China as a key hub for manufacturing and production, and the US as the largest source of foreign investment. Leaders in Asia need both great powers to remain engaged in the region, and economic realities suggest they would do well to do so. While full decoupling may not be in store for the United States and China, a selective decoupling is inevitable, according to US Representative Mike Gallagher. Big companies like Apple and Disney will need to undergo a complicated and costly restructuring to ensure that supply chains involving sensitive materials are moved out of China. The US wants to curb investments and sharing of technology in areas such as quantum computing, bioengineering, and advanced semiconductors that can be used for military purposes. The CHIPS Act passed last year to increase American investment in the domestic semiconductor industry, and the Biden administration has also set about strengthening export controls for sensitive technologies. One concern is making sure military-grade technology doesn't get lumped in with civilian-level tech. The private sector may face uncertainties that could shrink trade and investment if the border is not made clear. Decoupling efforts may not have the support of America's closest allies, as European Union President Ursula von der Leyen has stated that decoupling is not viable, desirable, or even practical for Europe. While some de-risking may be needed, it should be done only to a limited extent. One major concern with decoupling is the impact it could have on the global economy. As Lagarde stated, a US-China split could lead to less economic growth, less prosperity, and more poverty across the world. The United States and China are two of the largest economies in the world, and their trade relationship has significant implications for other countries. If decoupling does happen, it could lead to other countries becoming more economically dependent on China, as the United States would no longer be a major market for their goods. This could also limit the ability of these countries to access critical technologies and markets. Furthermore, the process of decoupling itself could be complicated and costly for companies that rely on supply chains involving China. They may need to restructure their supply chains, which could take time and resources. This could also have a ripple effect on smaller companies that rely on these larger companies for business. Despite the concerns, there are reasons why both the United States and China are considering decoupling. China wants to reduce its reliance on the United States and avoid potential economic isolation in the event of a conflict. The United States, on the other hand, wants to limit China's access to critical technologies that could be used for military purposes. It remains to be seen whether decoupling will actually happen. Many experts believe that a full decoupling is unlikely unless the two countries go to war. However, a selective decoupling is seen as inevitable, particularly in areas involving sensitive technologies. The CHIPS Act, passed last year, is an example of U.S. efforts to increase investment in the domestic semiconductor industry. The Biden administration has also been working to strengthen export controls for sensitive technologies. One challenge will be ensuring that civilian-level technologies aren't lumped in with military-grade technologies, as this could have negative implications for trade and investment. Ultimately, decoupling is a complex issue that has implications for the global economy and the relationship between the United States and China. While some degree of de-risking may be necessary, it's important to carefully consider the potential consequences of decoupling and work to mitigate any negative impacts. In the current political climate, the possibility of a decoupling of the US and China's economies is a hot topic. Tensions between the two nations have been escalating for years, and the COVID-19 pandemic has only intensified the situation. While some argue that decoupling is necessary to protect national security interests and safeguard sensitive technologies, others warn that it would have severe consequences for global economic growth and poverty reduction. Christine Lagarde, the president of the European Central Bank, recently voiced her opposition to a decoupling of the US and China's economies, arguing that it would lead to less economic growth, less prosperity, and more poverty across the world. Despite her warning, the US and China have already begun to reduce their reliance on each other's economies, with the share of imports from each other decreasing significantly. The US and China both have their reasons for decoupling. China is wary of being left vulnerable and isolated in the event of a conflict with the US, and the country's leaders have no desire to rely solely on exports to America. Meanwhile, US leaders fear that China could gain access to America's advanced technology in the event of a conflict. However, the prospect of decoupling has raised concerns from industry experts who worry that it could have a significant impact on the global economy. One potential problem with decoupling is that it may not even be achievable. Some experts argue that Western leaders are trying to unpick decades of globalization and that many Asian nations see China as central to their economic future. Decoupling efforts could actually leave countries in Southeast Asia even more economically dependent on China than they are now. Additionally, many companies that have moved production to other countries still purchase components from China, making real decoupling much harder than it looks. While some experts argue that a full decoupling of the US and China's economies is unlikely, there are concerns about the potential for selective decoupling. US Representative Mike Gallagher has suggested that big companies like Apple and Disney may need to restructure their supply chains to ensure that sensitive materials are not sourced from China. The US is also seeking to limit investments and technology sharing in areas like quantum computing and advanced semiconductors, which could have military applications. The passage of the CHIPS Act, which aims to increase investment in the domestic semiconductor industry, and the Biden administration's strengthening of export controls for sensitive technologies are further indications that the US is serious about reducing its reliance on China. However, there are concerns that the broader global economy could suffer if military-grade technology is inadvertently included in restrictions on civilian-level tech. In conclusion, the decoupling of the US and China's economies is a complex issue with potentially far-reaching consequences. While there are valid arguments for both sides of the debate, it remains to be seen whether a full decoupling is achievable or desirable. The US and its allies will need to navigate these issues carefully in the coming years to ensure that economic growth and poverty reduction are not unduly affected. What do you think about the US-China economic decoupling? Do you think it's a good idea, or do you agree with Christine Lagarde that it should be avoided? Let us know in the comments below. And if you found this video informative, please like and subscribe to our channel for more content like this. Thank you for watching.